Why couldn't we get enough masks? Why couldn't we get enough ventilators? Why weren't there the perception that there weren't enough hospital beds? How come the morgues couldn't keep up? And so on and so on. How come we couldn't be prepared for this? And no matter how you look at it, at every area, it was a failure of government.
As a liberty-minded person, as you said, if people don't come out of this more libertarian, something will have gone wrong. What are the proper approaches for a liberty-minded government? So say a libertarian or classical liberal set of ideas that could get us through something like this. What should we have done sort of at the beginning? What should we have done as we're going through it right now? And what should we be looking at for the future if you want to keep people as free as possible while also dealing with something that we've never dealt with before?
Dave, if I were going to summarize my position in a sentence, it would be something like this. The medical professionals in the medical industry, free of all restrictions, should have been allowed to deal with this virus from the very beginning without the intervention of politicians. Period. I mean that.
So basically, just get rid of red tape. Just let them do their thing. No more regulations on experimental treatments. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, and not only that, but if you think about it, Dave, a lot of this flattened the curve analysis that led to the crackdowns and the mandatory social distancing and the universal house imprisonment that we're dealing with right now was due to the perception that the medical industry was unscalable in the event of emergency. Now, that's very interesting. People need to be asking the question, if it's true, why was an industry unable to scale? Industries specialize in scaling. When people buy more of your product, as an industry, you're excited to offer more of that product or service to them. What makes the medical industry unique in that respect? Why couldn't we get enough masks? Why couldn't we get enough ventilators? Why weren't there the perception that there weren't enough hospital beds? How come the morgues couldn't keep up? And so on and so on. How come we couldn't be prepared for this? And no matter how you look at it, at every area, it was a failure of government. It was that the system was heavily regulated. The Strategic Medical Reserve disincentivized hospitals from gathering their own supplies. The tariffs on masks seriously inhibited, and this is very personal to me because I have friends in New York who are nurses and doctors who are sharing masks and they can't get enough, and the tariffs seriously injured that. And the hospitals didn't have enough supplies on hand because they assumed that it was all there. The federal government was putting it all together. But then, of course, they opened the warehouse and the HASH ventilators don't work. The supplies weren't there because they had previously been depleted. Every area, all you see is government irrationality, the inability of hospitals to scale, the panic of the political class to force everybody into their homes, which is definitely where you should not be. Whether you have respiratory disease, the answer is to get outside, as everybody understands. You don't want to put old people with young people because that causes endless amounts of infections. You actually want to isolate and separate the people who are vulnerable to this disease, which are the old and frail. And the last thing you want to do is close the schools, because COVID, as we know now, is actually not fatal for young, healthy people. So at every single area, Dave, the government has done the wrong thing. And I don't know how long or how detailed we want to get here, but the testing fiasco was the great, I would say, beginning of all this stuff, because China had already gone through a trial run of this stuff. We had this benefit of this. We saw this coming. And the CDC and the FDA stopped, and this is a matter of record, really stopped private researchers from developing the test and distributing the test from the very beginning of this crisis. So that was a catastrophic thing. And that led to what I've called, pardon me, an epistemic crisis. We didn't know. We didn't know who had it, whether I had it, whether you had it, what we should do about it, how it was transmitted, who was vulnerable to the fatalities, what the case fatality rate is. We didn't know anything. So we replaced knowledge that we could have used with power and panic. And here we are today.
So is one of the inherent problems that we have fighting the bad ideas that would encroach on our rights, that even if you lay out to people, well, here's all the things that government has done wrong all the way, and here's why it can never work properly, that they always say, well, that just means we need more government. That just means we need to give it more money so it can be bigger, so that we can put more studies out there to make sure it knows how to do these things. And that answer always sort of sounds easy and right for people that aren't really thinking. It's much harder to say to people, oh, the government actually should have been scaled way back on this so we could have let the professionals deal with it. That sort of sounds scary to people, especially at a time right now where we feel like the future is just up in the air right now.
Yeah, I think this speaks to a little bit of a principle that's animated your career in your life, which you had a passion some years ago, a realization that people don't appreciate freedom. They don't have confidence in freedom, that freedom was being attacked fundamentally and philosophically by both the left and on the right too. And I think you worried about that. You actually asked yourself a very important question. What happens in the event of a crisis where we need freedom more than ever, and yet we don't have the intellectual foundations in place, where there's not a cultural love of this thing we call freedom, or much less an understanding of it? What happens then? And I think that was a very interesting perception that you had several years ago, that you really dedicated yourself really hard to this problem and tried your best to do something about it. But I think what we're seeing right now are the results of a culture that's forgotten the meaning of freedom. If you lose that, what do you replace it with? You replace it with the police state, with
something
planning,
not good,
with chaos. Yeah.
So right now, as we sit here all sort of trapped in our houses trying to figure out what to do, how concerned are you about some of those basic freedoms that we're talking about? I mean, right now, the right to assembly, for example, we cannot assemble together. You can't get 10 people in a room to do anything. We had our bizarre mayor, being nice, de Blasio in New York City, say that if he found temples or churches that were having any gatherings, they could be permanently closed. Now, again, I'm all for the 6 foot social distancing, if that's what the professionals are telling us. But the idea that we could permanently close these things and we can't assemble, or our right to free speech, in that we know that even right now, big tech is removing blog posts that run counter knowledge. That's not necessarily the government stepping in and doing it. But just if we look at just some of our key freedoms, assembly and speech being the two at the moment, how concerned are you that we're just going to sort of put them aside throughout this, and then it'll be 6 months later and we'll go, oh, we had those things?
Yeah, I think anything is possible right now, Dave. And anybody who says otherwise hasn't been paying attention over the last couple of weeks. There's no chance. So before we met up just now, I looked back at what I wrote January 27th, because I wrote an article warning that the quarantine power could be used, and explained why this is a very, very bad idea. But even in that article, I imagined something like this, that the government would set up like quarantine areas, which in fact they have done. And they would come knocking on your door and grab people out of it, maybe one family at a time, and put them in the quarantine area. Or, that they would target maybe neighborhoods and round everybody up and put them in paddy wagons and put them in the quarantine area. But even January 27th, I never imagined that governments of the world would put everybody under what amounts to house arrest. So the fact that this has happened, I would say at this point, anything's possible. I worried because we put out a book last week called Coronavirus and Economic Crisis, a book put out by American Institute for Economic Research, and I put it on Amazon. And I got to tell you, I was worried. I was worried that Amazon would take it down. So I printed separately lots of copies independently with an independent publisher. and started making it available on the website just in case that we face massive censorship.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop yelling, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.